Hey everyone, I'm Liz and today I'm going to show you how I made these crochet Black Widow spiders. If you want to follow along with the written pattern, click the link on the screen or check in the description below. Some things you'll need for this tutorial are some Aran weight yarn in black and red. I'm using Red Heart Super Saver brand, but you can use any brand you like. You'll also need a crochet hook. I'll be using a size E. But if you want to make a smaller size, you could use crochet thread and a size B hook, like I have for these spiders here. You'll also need a pair of scissors and a yarn needle. First I'm going to make the base of the spider, this round part here at the back. I'm going to start with a magic circle, so I'm going to wrap my yarn around my fingers twice, and into those two loops I'm going to pull up a loop and chain 2. And that's going to count as the first stitch of the row. Next I'm going to single crochet 1 using black, but I'm going to finish that stitch with my red yarn so I can do a couple of stitches using red. So pull up a loop, and change colors to red. Now I'm going to single crochet 2 using red, but on the second red stitch I'm going to change colors back to black. Okay, I've changed colors to black. Now I'm going to single crochet 2 more using black, but on the second stitch I'm going to change colors back to red. Okay, I've changed colors back to red. Now I'm going to single crochet 2 more using red, but on the second red stitch I'm going to change colors back to black. Alright, I've changed colors. Now I'm going to close my magic circle. First I'm going to pull on the tail a little bit until I have a bigger loop and a smaller loop. Then I'm going to pull that smaller loop from the side that's closest to the tail until the other loop closes. And now I'm going to pull on my tail until the other loop closes. Now I'm going to continue using my black yarn. First I'm going to find that stitch that counted as the first stitch in the previous row. And I'm going to single crochet into that stitch, and that's going to be the first stitch of this row. And I'm going to increase every stitch of this next row, which means I'm going to single crochet twice into each stitch. So I'm going to single crochet again into that same stitch. Then I'm going to continue to increase every stitch of this row. And if you like, you could leave the front loop open when you get to those red stitches and increase only on the back loops to leave a clear line between the red and the black. So I finished increasing every row. So I'm going to slip stitch to the first stitch of the row, and I'm going to cut off my yarn. Now I'm going to cut off a long tail of my red yarn that I left here, and I'm going to use that tail to outline the red hourglass shape at the front of my work. Now the base of my spider is finished. I've sewn in all my ends. Now I'm going to continue using black yarn, and I'm going to create the body cluster, which is the part between the legs of my spider. Every stitch of this part is going to be worked into the same stitch. That's going to be the top middle of the hourglass shape here. It doesn't really matter which side you use as long as you start at the top middle of the hourglass shape. First, I'm going to pull up a loop into the top middle stitch of the base and chain 2. And that's going to count as the first stitch of my cluster. Now into the same stitch, I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop and pull through 2 loops of the loops on my hook. This is basically like making a double crochet but leaving the stitch open instead of finishing it. So now I have 2 loops left on my hook. So I'm going to do that 2 more times until I have a total of 4 loops on my hook. So yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through 2. Now I have 4 loops on my hook, so next I'm going to pull a loop through all the loops on my hook to finish my cluster. Next I'm going to create the mandibles, which is the teeth-like part at the top of the body. I'm going to chain 4, then slip stitch to the 3rd chain from the hook. Then I'm going to slip stitch into the next chain, and that will complete the first mandible. Now to make the other, I'm going to chain 4 more, slip stitch to the 3rd chain from the hook, and slip stitch to the next chain. Next I'm going to slip stitch around the leftmost post of my cluster to begin the legs. So around this side of my cluster I made for the body, I'm going to slip stitch. Each leg is pretty much the same except for how long they are and where I'll anchor down the leg to the side of the body. For the first leg I'm going to chain 12, but if you want you could chain more if you want a spider with extra long legs. Next I'm going to slip stitch into the second chain for my hook. And then slip stitch into the rest of my chains until I get back down to that post. So I finished my first leg. To anchor that leg, I'm going to slip stitch around the same post of the cluster where I started the leg. Then I'm going to chain 14 to make the second leg. Once again, I'm going to slip stitch to the second chain from the hook and into the remaining chains. Okay, I've finished the second leg. To anchor this leg, I'm going to once again slip stitch around the same post. Then I'm going to chain 14 to make the third leg. And slip stitch into the second chain from the hook, then slip stitch into the remaining chains. Okay, I'm done with the third leg, so I'm going to slip stitch to anchor this leg, but this time I'm going to slip stitch into the top middle of the base, into the same stitch I worked into when I was working my cluster. Then I'm going to chain 12 to make the last leg on this side. And once again, slip stitch into the second chain from my hook and into the remaining chains. And to anchor this last leg, I'm going to slip stitch into the next stitch around my base. Next, I'm going to continue to slip stitch around the base until I get to the bottom middle of the hourglass shape. I'm going to slip stitch 7 times into the stitches around the base. So I have finished my 7 slip stitches. Next I'm going to create the spinnerets, which is this part at the bottom of the base. Note that the spinnerets are made in the same way as the mandibles. So I'm going to chain 4, then slip stitch the 3rd chain from my hook, and slip stitch to the next chain. That's going to be the first spinneret. Now to make the next one, chain 4 more. Slip stitch to the 3rd chain from the hook, and slip stitch to the next chain. And then to finish the spinnerets, I'm going to slip stitch into the same stitch around the base where the spinnerets began. Now I'm just going to slip stitch 7 more until I get to this spot on the opposite side of the legs so I can make the next set of legs. So I've finished my 7 slip stitches and gotten to the stitch where I'm going to add my next set of legs. It's going to be pretty much the same as my other set of legs, but mirrored. So first I'm going to chain 12. Then just like before, I'm going to slip stitch to the 2nd chain from my hook and into the remaining chains to create my leg. Then I'm going to slip stitch to anchor this leg, once again into the top middle of the base, into the same stitch I worked into when I was working my cluster. Then I'm going to chain 14 to make the 2nd leg and slip stitch into the 2nd chain from the hook and into the remaining chains. Then, just as on my opposite side, I'm going to anchor that leg by slip stitching around the post. But on this side, I'm going to slip stitch around the rightmost post of my cluster. Then I'm going to chain 14 to make the 3rd leg. Slip stitch into the 2nd chain from my hook and into the remaining chains. And then slip stitch around that same post. Then to make the final leg, I'm going to chain 12 and slip stitch into the 2nd chain from my hook and into the remaining chains. And then I'm going to end my work, so I'm going to slip stitch into the same stitch where I began my mandibles. Then I'm going to cut off my yarn and sew in my end. And now my spider is complete. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you'd like to see more tutorials like this, subscribe to my channel and I'll see you next time. Bye!